As the twilight sky darkened over the skyline, a young man was sauntering his way through the spatial crowds of his street towards his nondescript apartment. With hands in coat pockets and a messy tangle of brown hair, he looked like your average citizen. Well, actually he was just an office boy fresh out of university named Gene, but despite the melancholic expression, a feeling of dull enthusiasm was bubbling inside. Another 5 days of paperwork and filing was once again over, and he could now return to the happy solitude that was his apartment. Usually, his celebration would involve sleeping in, a simple meal from the fridge, the odd browse of the internet, and if he had the cash, a visit to the pub. However, being an otaku, there was one thing that was always welcome in his heart: anime, Japanese animation. Call it what you will, it was his drug. Every night, he'd be on his laptop watching new episodes of any shows that interested him, before later complaining about it on the forums. When he'd go shopping, he would always get the odd manga or two, perhaps even a DVD if he was lucky enough. However, despite being reputed as a nerd, he still found time to socialize. His friends from university would spring into his life occasionally, some of which shared his enthusiasm, and would get into arguments on which character was hotter, or which robot was cooler. And it was one of these friends, a girl. That would be the motive for Gene's more than chipper mood. The girl in question was Amy. Gene had first met her whilst at a convention a couple of years before. He remembered the sight of her wearing a well-designed outfit of Toru Honda, which left him intrigued. Somehow braving the risk of rejection, he managed to talk her up, and the rest, as the cliché goes, was history. Ever since, the two had gone out many times, including several conventions, one of which would be held at the convention center the next day. Considering they lived separately, and had differing work shifts, the feeling of being with his girl again made him more excited about tomorrow. Eventually, Gene had arrived at his room, his mind busy on tomorrow and on tonight's daily episode. However, as he pushed the door open, he found something odd about the way the door opened which wasn't there before. A distinct crinkle from below was enough of a clue for him to look down, to see a white parcel envelope jammed under his door. Confused, Gene picked up the letter to inspect it, curiously aware of the minuscule bulge inside, which suggested that the contents were more than a simple letter. Printed on the right-hand corner, in colorful bubble font, assisted by some Japanese kanji, was the title. Magic Cosplay, costume store website, www.magic-cosplay.com. Gene reread the strange message, failing to remember his association with the brand, before seeing the attached note. Dear Gene, I thought it's about time you at least tried to cosplay this year. So I brought you this. I know it looks small, but it's a start. From Amy. Upon seeing the familiar name, Gene realized what this was about. As it turned out, Amy was also a cosplay enthusiast, who worked at a clothing store to hone her skills. However, despite respecting the girl's interest, Gene didn't share the same enthusiasm, denying any of Amy's requests. He had his excuses: he didn't want to waste money on materials, his lifestyle giving him a lack of time to make a costume, but most of all was that he felt shy about the whole thing. It didn't seem to bother Amy too much, though she would tease him for it. Now, however, it appeared that she had finally lost patience and had decided to take a direct option via a package brought on the internet. Deciding to meet his fate, Gene started to tear through the envelope, not caring what became of the discarded paper. Upon reveal, his fingertips were gingerly holding a simple, red, cotton armband with the words Super Director written in Japanese kanji. Within nanoseconds, Gene's otaku brain clicked: only one girl had the honor of wearing such a cloth, Miss Suzumiya, Haruai. In bewilderment, Gene looked at the plain item. Throughout watching the show The Melancholy of Haruai Suzumiya, he remembered how the armband had brought authority to the leader of the SOS Brigade. However, it also gave him a chill, considering that reality warping powers or not, Haruai was his animated goddess. She was smart, eccentric, and with her shoulder-length hair graced by a yellow ribbon, athletic body, and eyes full of wild enthusiasm, beautiful. For a few moments, Jean examined the garment, wondering what to do with it after all. It did seem strange to be given a piece of clothing by a female character. His initial thought was to discard it, but he ultimately thought it would be a waste not to wear it. At least it's not the entire outfit, he thought, deciding to put a positive spin on this strange scenario. After fumbling the cloth around awkwardly, he finally was able to slide it up his arm. Just as he had placed it onto his bicep though, a sudden tingle buzzed along where the armband lay. Dismissing it as just static, Jean turned his attention to his laptop, switching it on before pressing the necessary icons to download his daily episode of anime. However, looking at his arm again, Jean suddenly did a double take. The left sleeve of his usually gray jacket now sported an ugly white blob. Clearly not remembering that from before, Jean cautiously touched it. To his surprise, he found that it didn't feel sticky or wet, but more like typical cotton. Even queerer still was that the stain was spreading. Within seconds, Jean's entire sleeve was completely white cotton and the cuff was fading into a bluish hue. What the? Jean could only utter as another change, this time physical, started to concern him. Something subtle about his hand looked off. On closer inspection, he realized that it barely resembled his own. It appeared more delicate, thinner, smaller perhaps, accompanied by smooth peach skin. Even his nails looked evenly manicured. Just as he could absorb what was going on, an awkward shift came from his legs and stomach. This was soon followed by a series of dull cramps throughout his body, which throbbed through him as his surroundings grew around him. Grimacing, it soon dawned on him that he was shrinking. Paralyzed to the spot, Jean just looked on in disbelief as his body realigned itself to match the smaller frame his body was becoming. By the time his jacket, which shrunk with him, was entirely bleached in white fabric, his shrinking spurt had stopped with a stomach-churning halt. Even though he wasn't good at judging height, the youth estimated that a good 6 inches had gone from his 5 feet 10 inches frame. Realizing that something weird was happening to him, Jean quickly rushed to the bathroom to see how worse his condition had become. As he did, a faint draft at his calves warned him that his jeans were starting to rise up. By the time he finally got to the sink mirror, Jean was aghast to see that his jacket was fusing at the middle, as his zipper disintegrated long before. More worrying was that there were some other noticeable changes. His usually short hair to his awe was now longer than he remembered. Within seconds, strands of brown hair were starting to obscure his forehead, and flowing down the sides of his mortified face. A bagginess around his legs turned Jean's eyes downwards. "Oh God," he cried as his now jean shorts were now exposing a lot of leg, around halfway up his thigh. Moments later, and it had become shapeless, appearing more like a single mass of blue material that barely wrapped around his thighs, like a skirt. What's more was that he saw his black socks were self-traveling northwards of his apparently slender thighs, and his gray sneakers had darkened towards a brown shade. What was more unsettling was the sight of his exposed flesh on his thighs, which other than being slender, were now silkily shaven. With these sudden changes, Jean logically realized what was happening. He stuttered, becoming a girl, before slapping a hand to his mouth. Was it him, or did his voice crack at the end? Well, he didn't want to find out, and in a wild presumption eyed the red armband. Of course, he thought. The changes had only started when he put it on. Would they stop if he took it off? Without even thinking, he yanked the material off his arm and threw it on the tiled floor. He looked back at the mirror in hope that the changes had stopped. Originally, it seemed they had. Phew, he sighed in a higher, but still male-sounding, timbre. That was close. Upon hearing the higher octave on the last word, Jean soon regretted ever saying anything. That was because as soon as he did, his hair continued downwards to his neck. He knew that the changes hadn't reversed, they were getting worse. In a renewed anxiety, Jean could only watch as his face lost all of its stubble and then started to reconfigure itself, as his once angular jawline was quickly altered into a gentle curve. Meanwhile, the neckline of his blouse started to shift around and refold itself into a scarf-like pattern, which then darkened to a blue tint and finished off with a red stripe. As the accompanying red ribbon bow wrapped itself just below the newly formed V-shaped sailor collar, Jean realized the sudden eeriness of the outfit he was now wearing. It was Haruhi Suzumiya's outfit, and it could only mean one thing. "I'm becoming Haruhi!" Jean cried, now shocked to find that his voice was now blurting out an excited soprano that only Haruhi would speak in. As much as he didn't want to believe it, what was impossible, by the look of his reflection, was becoming a reality. By now, his cheeks had puffed out, and nose shrunk into gentler features, as his already wide, in shock, eyes further expanded, with thicker eyelashes gracefully projecting outwards. Accompanying this cute face was his now shoulder-length hair, which to his dreaded prediction, was finished with an irritating pinch to his scalp. Glancing upwards, he saw a yellow ribbon had materialized, sitting in a perfect arc amongst his bangs. By now, Jean was amazed, but also scared at the girl that he was becoming. He didn't like the idea of becoming Haruhi, let alone becoming a girl. He was a young adult man with a job and a girl to worry about. Now this suddenly happens? What if it was permanent? How was he going to adapt? "I don't want to be a girl," he cried, and in desperation, started to take off his clothes in haste. Upon stripping off his undershirt, which now resembled a short, taut singlet, revealing his smooth navel, Jean was shocked at how thin his physique had become. He was actually lean to begin with, but his muscle tone had melted away on his arms and torso, leaving them thin and elegant, whilst his waist looked skinnier than ever. More humiliating was that his boxers had shriveled down to some frilly panties, which to his alarm were arousing his member. Eventually, the she-male had taken off all his clothes, right down to his ribbon, shoes and socks. Standing naked, Jean anxiously waited for this thin, smooth body to grow back to his old appearance. However, the continued altering of his singlet seemed to be a bad omen. The neckline now was dipping, whilst the straps became thinner, and two round cups formed at the chest. Moments later, a slight tingling flared up on his chest, as if ready to fill the bra out. "No," he asked, "please stop," as his now erect nipples darkened, signaling the inevitable. Distressed, Jean placed his palms over his chest in a futile attempt to stop the next stage, letting out an orgasmic moan as a sensitive twinge rocked through his body. However, despite his efforts, nothing was going to stop the surge of estrogen which blew out his flat pectorals into small mounds under his hands. As his breasts continued to swell under Jean's half-aroused, half-terrified expression, their increasing weight saw them descend slightly. However, as they filled up to a decent round C-cup, Jean's new breasts remained pert on his smooth chest. In two confirmed pokes, the youth continued to fall into uneasiness. But then, another sudden shift in his changing anatomy turned his train of thought towards his lower area. Firstly, his lower spine suddenly gave a crack, causing him to lurch over the sink. Looking around, he found that his lower back was now sticking out more profoundly, and could only watch helplessly as his ass filled towards a firm plumpness. But he had no time to enjoy the thought of having a round booty. He was too distressed to do so, as another crack hit his left hip. "OWWW," he shrieked in his girly squeal, as he forced himself onto the floor, landing onto his now soft derriere. Just then, the other hip cracked, causing him to impulsively clutch his sides, contorting his face in pain. Amazingly, the stinging sensation passed quickly as extra flesh built up along his sides, finishing off his hourglass figure. The transformation was almost done. By now, Jean started to dread the final phase and on instinct switched his hands to his crotch, hoping that somehow whatever was happening would avoid his manhood. However, a massive cramp soon broke all his hopes, as his testicles and penis violently burrowed into his body. In anguish, he again started to tear up, as his manhood continued to sink away. Terrified, she took a quick peek at her crotch, finding her sack just about gone and just 1 inch of flesh and shrinking, poking out. But then she had to grimace as a hot flash flared all over his body, the cramp in the budding girl's groin intensifying as her hands felt the small nub sink into a crevice of smooth flesh. Between labored pants, Jean felt the final part of his transformation reworking his system as his naked body convulsed on the floor. Then it was over. The hot flash diminished almost immediately and Jean lied on her back, her labored pants letting out melodious sighs. Re-exploring her hands around her crotch, she found there was nothing interrupting the flat area. Looking up cautiously, she saw nothing. That confirmed it. Jean was now truly female inside and out. Seeing that bareness down below, the first thing she did was allowing this fact absorb her, to which she let out a choked sob, then another, then she let all her despair lash out. Yet, as much as her life as a man disallowed it, she seemed to feel okay with crying, like it suddenly felt natural to her. Well, of course it was natural. She'd just been turned into a girl against her will, without any warning on whether the effects were long-term or not. But as she continued crying, a few pulses in her mind sent a sudden calm over her quivering form, stopping her rain of tears. Yes, she had changed, she thought, but why was she crying? If anything, she should be happy something weird happened out of her boring routine. After all, she was Haruhi Suzumiya, leader of the SOS Brigade. Finding that thought unusual, Haruhi got up, wiping fresh tears out of her eyes. Observing herself, she suddenly felt more enthusiastic about the change than before. Wow, she cried, as she started to observe herself curiously. Those cosplay guys don't miss a detail. Next thing she knew, she was spouting theories on how this was possible: alien technology? Nanomachines? Black magic? Sure, she admitted she couldn't be recognized as Jean anymore, but at least she looked good. In fact, upon referring herself as Jean, she felt disgusted. Sure, she still remembered being Jean, but did she look like a Jean? No, she wasn't. She decided, Haruhi I shall be then. Surprised about the sudden personality change, or was that Haruhi knew that despite her new form, it wasn't going to be convenient in the long run. That's when she had a crazy thought: could she will herself back? Quickly, she thought hard change me back, as she tried to picture the young man she once was, hoping that it would work. However, upon opening her eyes, she saw the same dissatisfied face of Haruhi looking back in the mirror. Damn it, she cried, I don't even have her powers. Of course by now, the cold had forced her to decide that being naked wasn't going to fix anything and she went to change. Sure, she could have done some experimenting, but that seemed unnecessary to her now, as if a switch in her brain had repressed her male urges. Maybe it was Haruhi's personality kicking in, but it astounded her that she felt comfortable putting on the school outfit again. She did consider putting on some more mannish clothes in her bedroom, but concluded that they would be too big to fit. As she dressed, Haruhi noticed that despite having to wear unfamiliar garments such as her bra and skirt, she actually didn't show any signs of struggle. It was as if instructions had been subconsciously imprinted in her memory to help guide through her recent changes. When she was done, Haruhi again gave herself a quick look. She thought she looked good before, but in her uniform, she was the perfect schoolgirl. Starting from her brown leathers, black socks fitted along her elegantly crafted calves. Then there was the blue skirt, which appetizingly revealed enough thigh and on an angle gave out the faint curved outline of her bum. The tightened belt gave a modest billowed effect from her tucked-in blouse, which gave off a crisp white sheen. The blouse itself was garnished with blue cuffs and sailor-style collar, supporting a red stripe, and accessorized with a stylish red bow. Arching along her long bangs like a crown was a yellow ribbon. But the finishing touch was what was standing proudly on her left arm, the SOS Brigade armband, which she didn't even give a second thought, feeling it completed her. As she looked at herself, she blushed at her adorableness, before shaking her head to concentrate on her next step of action. She knew now that the armband had caused such fantastical changes, and if she was going to know anything about it, had to go back to the source. Hungry to unravel this mystery, she quickly returned to where she left the torn envelope, and searched the remains fiercely for any information she missed. Though she didn't find any instructions, but did find the web address. Satisfied about the lead, Haruai returned to her laptop, ignoring the video ready for viewing, and quickly wrote the web address from memory into the search engine. Within seconds, she found the familiar bubbly letters of the Magic Cosplay logo, proudly stamped on the corner as it overlooked a series of items on sale. From just glancing, she could see that they promised anything from a Naruto jumpsuit to a host club jacket, which she presumed had the same transformational properties. Using the search engine, Haruai entered in the armband and after a few anxious moments, got the page she was looking for. Next to a picture of the armband was the information she needed. Haruai Suzumiya armband $5. Now is your chance to become as your favorite SOS brigade leader for a day. Upon application, this small accessory can physically change and adapt the personality of its victim and their clothes into Haruai Suzumiya in her stunning school uniform. Effects last for 24 hours for each wear. Reality-changing abilities not included. Personality change may vary. 24 hours was the only thing that came out of her mouth. Almost instantaneously, that line made her relieved and upset. On one side, she wouldn't be stuck like this forever, and at least she knew why she was a little more Haruai than usual. On the other though, she would have to stay in this body for the whole day, the day of the con. She could now imagine the strange attention she would get throughout the day, and felt a little afraid about the prospect. Just as she sighed, the shrill cry of her telephone rang out. Cautiously, Haruai didn't answer it. She knew it could have been Amy, but she didn't want to risk it, in case she'd freak out someone who was expecting Jean on the other line. Eventually, Amy's voice reassured her that she should have answered. Hello Jean, or is that Haruai now? If not, then forget I said that, she then nervously giggled. However, she continued sincerely, if you've put on the armband, then I'll presume that you're very confused and maybe a little mad. Don't worry, just to assure you it's not permanent and you'll be yourself again in 24 hours. I'm sorry I didn't warn you earlier, but I knew you wouldn't wear it if I did, so please forgive me. If you're still there, then please come and see me. I want to know if we're still all right with each other, and I wouldn't mind seeing your cute outfit. Well, that's if you come. If not, well, goodbye Jean. Upon hearing the final sincere words from her girl, Haruai knew she should go over to see her. She admitted that she was a little mad at Amy for being tricked into this getup, but Amy must have really wanted her to cosplay even as a girl. Besides, she did feel she needed to show someone she trusted what had happened. So, foregoing her usual routine, Haruai turned off the laptop and prepared to leave, grabbing an oversized coat on her way out. After all, it was freezing outside, and would definitely avoid any weird stares from her out-of-place uniform. Nonetheless, after checking the hallway for any witnesses, she snuck out. Of course, seeing that Amy lived 4 blocks away, she knew she would have to go out in public. However, both the darkness outside and her coat gave her enough confidence that she wouldn't be the center of attention. However, as she continued walking in her feminine stride, swaying her hips doing so, more foreign thoughts kept her apprehensive. As Jean, she didn't mind walking the darkening streets alone at 6 p.m. However, as Haruai, she was a vulnerable teenage girl, just about the perfect description for a rape victim. Get a grip Haruai, she thought aloud, nervously shaking her head. You're just being paranoid. You're braver than this. Just kick him in the head and run away. At the same time, however, she wanted to have a man to come by her side, as she felt every male eye her. She wasn't sure if she should consider any approvals from these boring folk flattering, or just sick, considering what she was just 30 minutes before. In fact, she then remarked that she just found the idea of men pleasing. Realizing what she was thinking, Haruai again shook her head, ignoring that she didn't find it unsettling, and quickly kept walking. Arriving at the apartment building, the girl hurried up the staircase with some extra zing as she took the familiar path towards the varnished door of number 181. This, she felt, was mostly because she was itching to show someone her transformation, like it was the greatest thing that ever happened. Knocking at the door, she waited for any sign of life to appear. Coming, went another feminine voice, before an attractive young woman fully opened the door. As Amy peeped through with medium-length blonde hair, eyes of hazel, and a cute button nose, Haruhi felt a friendly, but not lustful urge towards her. For a moment the woman looked at Haruhi, but indifference in a split second turned to nervous joy as she tried to recognize her friend. Jean, she presumed, only to be met with a shout of "It's Haruhi." Amy's face became more joyful at that moment, and she opened the door fully. "Haruhi," she cried, glomping the girl. "I'm so glad you came." All right, Haruhi insisted, "it's good to see you too, but you've got some explaining to do." Upon understanding the anxiety in her friend's tone, Amy allowed her in. Once in, Haruhi noticed that Amy was wearing slacks and a dress shirt over her usually trim body. "Who's that you're cosplaying?" she asked with interest. "You'll see," Amy happily replied, as they took opposing couches, "but first, could I see what you're hiding under that coat?" Almost unashamedly, Haruhi took the coat off, wanting to please her friend knowing that no one else was around. "Oh, that's just a charming outfit," Amy squealed. "I see you're going to be a real highlight at the con." "Really?" mumbled Haruhi, her tone dropping a little. "Well, I'm not sure." Curious, Amy asked, "How come?" "What do you think?" replied Haruhi. "I wasn't planning to go like this." Turning sympathetic, Amy pleaded, "Haruhi, I know you're still struggling with the concept of being a girl, but..." "But what?" protested Haruhi. "Do you know how uncomfortable it is going to be for me? People will be looking at me." "So what if they do?" assured Amy. "They are not going to see something weird, they will see a cute schoolgirl." "Yeah," retorted Haruhi, "one they'll check out on." "How am I supposed to react?" "Don't worry," said Amy, "I'll be by your side." "But I wanted this to be romantic?" Haruhi asked. "How can it be when I seem to like boys now?" It was then that Amy sighed, and picked up a blazer beside her. Slipping it onto her frame, she simply said, "Did you think you were the first one that's gone through this?" Before Haruhi could ask to clarify, the second extraordinary transformation of the night took its place. Amy started to grow, as the outfit grew with her. Her hair darkened to a chocolate brown, and shortened around the edges. To match, her jaw and face became rougher, and her grunts at each change became deeper. The sagging shoulders of the blazer quickly filled as her chest became broad and flat. Eventually, with one last relieved groan, from the unseen growth of male reproductive organs, Amy had become a very familiar young man, to Haruhi's shock. "Amy, you're," Haruhi exclaimed. "Kion?" With a sigh, Kion nodded, adding in a much deeper tone, "Yeah, pretty much." "But how?" Haruhi cried, still flabbergasted at recent events. "Well," explained Kion, "here's the thing. This blazer was originally going to be yours." "What?" exclaimed Haruhi. "I was meant to be Kion." "But how come?" "Slow down, Haruhi." Kion intervened. "Before you get mad at me, allow me to explain." "Then explain," Haruhi said, pointing a finger, "or else you get a penalty." Upon hearing that question, Kion sighed, ready to explain himself. "You see," he said, "it's just that with you, I was sick of cosplaying on my own while we went to those cons. So I decided to make a Kion cosplay for you, and we could go out as Haruhi and Kion." Yeah, replied Haruhi impatiently, "get to the point." Kion, now frustrated, continued, "Anyway, I couldn't find a blue blazer at such a low cost, so I came across the site. Initially, I thought they were joking when they said it could transform its wearer, but I saw the low price and brought that and the armband. When they arrived, I just wanted to make sure the blazer felt right on you, and used myself as a guide, and..." He then spread his arms wide, showing the aftermath, as you can see, I did get a surprise. At least I got the day off though. What about me? Insisted Haruai, looking bored. Alright, Kion snapped. Just let me finish. Anyway, when I became Amy again, I got this crazy thought I could dress as Haruai, but didn't seem much of a stretch for me, and I actually was well adjusted to being Kion. Then I had this crazy thought. Why not you'll be Haruai and I'd be Kion? But why? Demanded Haruai. It was then that Kion gave another sigh. Well, I knew that Haruai was your favorite character, and I thought that perhaps since these cosplay items tweaked our personas, then maybe a little of her enthusiasm would rub off and you'd appreciate cosplay more. Really? Replied Haruai, but aren't you afraid what people may think? What's there to worry about? Insisted Kion. We could cover for each other, and no one will recognize us. And even if I have to deal with a penis for a day, it would be worth it to see you trying cosplay. His voice then started to fade as he started to look down, but I guess since you don't seem enthusiastic about it, then I'll go by myself. Haruai processed what had just been told to her. Sure, she knew she could leave now, but now she felt guilty of leaving Kion alone. He just told her that he cared for her enough to willingly go as an actual man to protect Haruai/Jean's dignity. If Jean really cared for Amy that much, wouldn't she do the same? Taking a breath of defeat, she replied, I'll go. Kion looked up, but still didn't reply. Geesh, do I have to repeat it to you? Answered Haruai, I'll go. Really? Kion asked. Why not? Concluded Haruai. It's just one day, and I suppose no one will recognize us. At the sound of this news, Kion uncharacteristically, for the man he'd become, hugged the girl, giving a faint thank you. In surprise, Haruai just stood still in the embrace, feeling her heartbeat flutter. Kion, she peeped, as Kion pulled away to see Haruai's. Sure, she thought, he looked nothing special, but there was something about him, and the safety of his bigger frame hugging her that placed her feelings in doubt. You may laugh, but even in your form, I find you a little cute myself. You know, Kion said, a soft smile entering his face, rare in itself. I think it's the blazer talking, but I might find you more attractive with a ponytail. Then, delivering a giggle, Haruai lightly spoke, I love you, Kion. I love you too, said Kion. Then, ignoring the gender barrier, the two kissed each other in their embrace. The next day at the convention, despite their early nerves, Jean and Amy was that Haruai and Kion enjoyed their time. Haruai in particular appreciated the comments of cute, and was happy she wasn't ridiculed, whilst Kion stayed by her side, providing support. Together the couple shopped at the Traders' Hall, talked to various fans, and even gathered the courage, especially Haruai, to have their portrait taken by a young drawer. They returned home that night in time to revert to their old forms, but even then, their love for one another didn't fade. They soon went on other dates and eventually, Amy moved into Jean's apartment. In return, Jean finally caved into his girlfriend's offers to cosplay, actually liking some of them. As for the magic cosplay items? Well, the two still keep them, and even wear them on days off, as they both took a shine to their alter egos. After all, everyone likes a little spice in their relationship, don't they?